let's make something delicious. Now for these wonderful sour cream donuts, we have 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter that's extremely soft. See, it's like mushing up soft. You want it very soft, just not melted. On the verge of melting though. You want 1/4 of a cup of sugar and 1/4 of a cup of packed light brown sugar. Now, the butter should be soft enough that you shouldn't have to get out of a mixer for this. But if you just want to get out a mixer and do it with a mixer, go ahead. Now to this, we are going to add 2/3 of a cup of sour cream. I do not recommend low fat or fat free. I mean, why would you do that? You're making donuts. But also it's not going to work because you need that fat. But like I said, again, you are making donuts. I don't think you're looking for fat-free stuff if you're making donuts. This is a treat. Treat yourself every now and again. Now mix that in really well. Now we are going to add 2 large egg yolks. Those egg yolks are so beautiful. They are from our chickens. Now we are going to add 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract. If you guys have watched me before, you know I'd never measure vanilla. So it's going to be 1.5 teaspoons roughly measured, which is probably going to be more like 2. Now you want to mix all that in, because at this point, you can mix the devil out of this thing because you have no gluten in there. Once you get the flour in, you want to be careful how much you mix because you develop gluten and you'll end up with tough donuts. And while that's a good thing to say to somebody, while you can easily say tough donuts to someone, it's not a good thing to have. You want nice tender donuts. And I'm going to show you how to get a tender cake donut. Now on this wax paper, you can do it in a bowl, in a separate bowl, or you can do it on wax paper like I'm doing it. I do it on wax paper. This doesn't dirty up more dishes, and also it works as a funnel so that I can get it in the bowl cleaner and easier. I have 2 1/4 cups of cake flour. You can use all-purpose, but the donuts are not going to come out as tender. I'm using cake flour to make them more tender. Then we have 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Because this is not a yeasted donut. This is a cake donut. For those of you who have never had an old-fashioned sour cream donut, they are a cake donut. So you don't use yeast, you use baking powder to leaven things. And as you can see, I'm kind of mixing it all around on my paper. Now we are going to start funneling in our dry ingredients. We'll do it in about 3 parts. That way it's easier to mix in. So you will mix in lightly between each addition, and your dough will get thicker and thicker because this is a dough, it's not a batter. Because this isn't going to be baked in a pan like those cute little donut pans you can buy these days. This isn't going to be baked in that. These aren't baked. These are going to be deep fried. Somebody may ask in the comments, can I bake these? You probably could, but I've never tried it, so I can't guarantee the results if you bake them. But if you choose to bake them, let me know in the comments below if it worked for you. Now I'm going to add the other 2 additions of flour, and I'll show you what it looks like when it becomes a dough. Now our dough is all mixed up. Now if it starts getting too stiff on you to mix with a spoon, you can get your hands in there. I did that. I prefer the tools that God put at the end of my wrist. Now this dough is a little sticky right now. Just a little bit sticky. You don't want that because you have to roll it out. So instead of just trying to roll it out right now while it's sticky, this needs to chill. So you need to cover this with some plastic wrap. That way you don't run the risk of refrigerator funk getting in your dough. So you want to cover this, refrigerate it for 1 hour. Now our dough has chilled for an hour, and I floured my surface and got it back out. It's nice and cold, but it's still workable. So now we are going to roll it out, but you don't want to roll it out too very thin, because then your donuts won't be big donuts, they'll be little donuts. They'll be flat donuts. You don't want flat donuts. So you only want to roll it out to about a 1/2 inch. You want to keep your surface floured, and you want to keep the top of your dough floured enough that it won't stick to things. It won't stick to your rolling pin that way, and it won't stick to your board or countertop, whichever you're rolling it out on. You see that I keep turning it. I keep turning it to make sure that it's not sticking. Now at this point, before you start cutting them out, you want to have a large pot. If you don't have a deep fryer, you want to have a large pot. I'm using an enamel cast iron Dutch oven, and you want to have 2 to 3 inches of a neutral flavored oil heating up, and you want to heat it to 350 degrees, and you want it to maintain 350 degrees. You don't want to let it go above or below. Now we are going to start cutting our donuts out. And for this, I have got an old-fashioned donut cutter. This is very old. My mother and father-in-law got it for me at an antique store, but you can buy them online. If I can remember, I will put a link in the description for a donut cutter. Now remember to flour your cutter really well, and just push down, and if you flour it good enough, it should come out pretty easy. Now it's up to you whether you want to fry the holes or whether you want to just push them all back together and make more donuts with them. That's entirely up to your preference. If you like donut holes, then go ahead and fry them. Now you have all these scraps here. You don't want those to go to waste. You want to gather those back up, make them into a nice ball again, but don't work it too hard because it will make for tough donuts. So you want to just push them back together really nicely. You want to keep it as cold as you can and pat it back out, because at this point it's loosened up enough that you shouldn't have to roll it. You should just be able to pat it out. And pat it back out into about 1/2 inch and cut more donuts. Now you want to make sure that you don't do a bunch of re-rolls, because the last re-rolls will be pretty tough. So you want to make sure that you minimize the amount of re-rolls that you do. Now I really don't want to do another re-roll with this last little bit of dough, so I'm just tearing it off, making it into little balls, and I'll fry those just like they are, but they'll fry for much less time. Now I got about 9 donuts, but mine are this size. Now if you choose to cut yours bigger, then you'll get less donuts, but remember they will puff up in the oil because they do have leavening in them. So you want to keep these cold while your oil is coming to 350 degrees. So you want to put them on a sheet pan and put them in the refrigerator while your oil is coming to a good temperature. Now while our oil is finished heating, because you need everything done before your oil is hot enough, that way you can just start frying, because they fry very quickly. So you want to have a plate lined with plenty of paper towel ready for the donuts to go on to drain. You also want to have your glaze made. Even though your donuts need to cool and drain for about 5 to 10 minutes after they come out of the oil, you need to go ahead and have your glaze made. So for this glaze, we have 1.5 cups of powdered sugar, a good little pinch of salt, and we have 4 tablespoons, which is 1/4 cup, of unsalted butter melted. You want to let that cool a little bit. And we have 1 teaspoon, roughly measured, of vanilla extract. And you want to start mixing this together to determine how much milk you will need. It can be anywhere from 1 to 2 tablespoons, or possibly even more, depending on your house at the time. It can be a very dry atmosphere. If so, it will need more. So we'll just have to wait and see how much we'll actually need. So I'm going to start with 1 tablespoon of milk. because you can add to, but you can't take away. And if you want to add something, you want to be able to add more milk instead of more sugar, because if you add more sugar, it's just going to get sweeter and sweeter. So you want to err on the side of making it too thick rather than making it too thin. And right now it's coming together, but as you can see, it's way too thick. It's more like a frosting than a glaze, and you want it to be a thicker glaze. But you want to stir it until it's smooth before you add another addition of milk. So I'm going to add about half a tablespoon more. So just add it in half tablespoon increments at this point. So I'm going to add the other half tablespoon, and we'll see what we need from there. Now, because it's extremely dry here, I'm going to need just a little bit more. So I'm going to put in about maybe a fourth of a tablespoon more, and we'll see where I'm at then, because you want the glaze to basically, you don't want it to be watery, and you don't want it to be thick like an icing. You want it to basically, when you raise up your spatula, you want it to fall off your spatula in ribbons, and then hold in the bowl without melting back in. You want it to hold for a few seconds. I'm going to add just a wee bit more, about a fourth of a tablespoon more. With making glaze, it's never a precise amount of milk to add, because it depends on your kitchen and your air. If you have a dry air mass or a moist air mass, it depends on everything. So it's more about eyeballing it. And see, now this is falling in ribbons and staying. This is perfect, but I may have to add a little bit more by the time it comes time to dunk them. I may have to add a little bit more. Now we are at 350. So now I'm going to take my donuts and I'm going to lay them on a slotted spoon to put them in. I'm only going to do 3 at a time. And as you can see, they'll sink to the bottom, but then they'll start to rise to the top. They will only need to fry for about a minute to a minute and a half on each side. Now, they're frying, and as you can see, they just pop to the top. They will just float to the top. Now you need to maintain your oil at 350. Mine is trying to go a little above, so I'm going to knock the heat back just a little bit. Now, when they're nice and brown on one side, you want to flip it. But they're not quite there yet. Just a few more seconds. So now I'm going to flip. Oh, look at that. Look how beautiful. And if they flip well, you know you've let them fry enough. Because if they don't flip, then they're too heavy with oil and you've let them sit too long. So now you want to go for another minute to a minute and a half. Now I want to flip it back over so that I can see the other side and see they're nice and brown on the other side. It's been about a minute. So by the time I get them out, it'll be about a minute and a half. So you want to take them out to your paper towel lined plate so that they can start draining. And look at that, ain't that gorgeous? You want to make sure your oil is at 350 again before you add your next batch. So make sure it maintains 350. Mine rose a little bit above, so I turned my heat down, and I'm going to let it cool down just a little bit. And to let it cool down more, I'm going to drop a donut ball in to try to make sure that it brings the temperature down. So I'm going to drop a few donut balls in to let them bring the temperature down. Be careful of splashing. I recommend you don't drop them in like I dropped that in, that you put them on a slotted spoon and lower them in. A slotted spoon or a frying spider. Now I'm going to keep frying these up, and I'll show you what they look like when we're ready to glaze them. Okay, now we're back to our glaze, and I can't help it, I have to show you these donuts. They look magnificent. Look at those. Look at these donuts. And look at the little holes. Oh my gosh, they look so good. As far as this goes, this was a re-roll. Now, sour cream donuts have a tendency to get craggy like this. That's fine. You actually want that. That way the glaze can seep in. So now, as you can see, your glaze has gotten a little thick on you again. So you want to add just a splash more milk. Probably about a half a tablespoon to loosen it back up. Now, you want to have a cooling rack or some sort of rack with parchment under it, ready to put them on so they can drip. Now, as you can see, it's falling really good off the spoon again. By this point, your first donuts that you fried have set for long enough that you can go ahead and dunk them. So now I'm going to dunk them. I'm going to dunk both sides. It's up to you if you want both sides or you just want the tops. And you want to shake it off. No, not like Taylor Swift. Now, we're going to move them to our rack. And if your glaze seems a little thick for you, if it seems like it's coating a little too much, which that one seems like it is coating just a little too much, I'm going to add a little bit more milk. But you got to remember, by the time it drips off and stuff, it's going to be a much thinner glaze than you originally thought it was going to be. So I'm going to keep dunking and I'll show you what they look like when they're all done. Now these beauties are all glazed up. On these 3, I did the whole donut. On the rest of them, I just did the tops, and then I tossed all the donut holes and donut balls in the remaining glaze and just tossed them around until they were nicely glazed and they sucked up the rest of the glaze. So come back next time to Angela K's Kitchen, where I take you from gourmet to everyday and everything in between. God bless.
I got the worst job in all of YouTube. I had to try these amazing looking donuts. Yeah. Look at that. Look at that. Y'all, get yourself a cup of coffee and make these donuts. It's amazing. Angela K can cook.